Now, I said that, what I focus on is between born of a virgin and suffered under Pilate. But I want to go outside the bounds of that just for a minute, if you'll bear with me, if you'll give me some grace here.
Oh, okay.
There's this
All right.
amazing passage in the Hebrew version of the Gospel of Matthew, which is earth-shattering. It's unbelievable. So the first two words Jesus speaks after the resurrection. Now, Matthew 28:9. And look, I'm not talking here from a perspective of faith. I'm a Jew. I'm not a Christian. But this is recorded in the Gospel of Matthew in both the Greek and the Hebrew. And what's recorded in the Greek is the first word. It's actually one word in the Greek, chairata, which in the English is translated as all hail. That's a perfectly good Greek greeting. All hail Caesar, right? It sounds Greek. It sounds Roman. In the Hebrew, the first two words he speaks are YHWH. Yehovah will save you. Yehovah is the name of the Father. And the name of the Father in the ancient Hebrew, Yehovah. Some people say Yahweh. I hope we'll get a chance to talk about that in a future session, about how it's actually Yehovah. But his first two words that he speaks in the Hebrew version of Matthew, according to the one preserved by Jewish scribes, remember how meticulous Jewish scribes are, the first two words are YHWH.
YHWH.
Which means Yehovah will save you.
Okay, now let's go back to what the angel told both Miriam and Joseph to name the child.
So the angel says...
from the Hebrew Matthew.
Right, so in the Hebrew Matthew, it says to call the child Yeshua. And why Yeshua? Because Yoshia et ami, he will save my people. Same word, Yoshia.
Yeshua, Yoshia, and his first words after resurrection is Yehovah. Yoshia.
Which is also the meaning of his name. The name Yeshua means Yehovah Yoshia. Yehovah will save. So the first two words literally that he speaks, according to the Hebrew version of Matthew, preserved by Jewish scribes, is Yehovah Yoshia, which is the meaning of the name Yeshua and means Yehovah will save. The name the way it's written, but in the world to come, meaning when the Messiah comes and reigns on earth and brings peace to the world, then we'll speak the name. And they really didn't think it would be 2,000 years, but here we are, dealing with this. Now, you mentioned this name Yeshua, and I travel around the world, speak to different Hebrew roots groups, and I've heard a lot of different pronunciations of that name. I've heard people who say, well, in our congregation we don't say Yeshua, we say Yahusha, and others who say Yahushua, and all kinds of variations like that. And to me, that's so strange because, look, I struggled with how do I pronounce the name of the Father, YHVH, and that's because I was told the vowels were taken out of that name and replaced with the vowels of Adonai. I found that out. That wasn't true, that it was more complicated than that, as we explained in the first part. But there's never been a dispute about this name Yeshua in the Hebrew world. Meaning that's a common name actually in the Tanakh. It appears in Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 17, referring to Joshua the son of Nun.
Yeah, it's the guy that mows my yard when I'm not in Israel. It's Yeshua.
Okay, is it really? Okay.
Yeah, really.
It's I have a cousin named Yehoshua. It's a very common name. The name Joshua is simply Yehoshua, and the shortened form of Yehoshua is Yeshua all over the Tanakh. And Joshua the son of Nun, as I said in Nehemiah 8:17, is referred to as Yeshua bin Nun. So there's no secret or conspiracy there. It's just so clear that's the name Joshua, Yeshua.
And the book of Hebrews is called Jesus in King James.
Well, the same. Oh, yeah, that's right. In two places, also one place in Acts, it talks about Jesus, referring to Jesus bringing the people across the Jordan into the land of Israel.
Right.
Referring, that is Joshua. And the reason for that, Michael, is that in Greek, the name Jesus is Jesus, but the name Joshua is also Jesus. Meaning, if you only looked at the Greek, there are no two names, Joshua and Jesus, Yehoshua and Yeshua. It's only Jesus. There's only one form of that, and that's because there's no H in the Greek language. The H drops, and Yehoshua becomes Yeshua. All right. So, this name Yeshua actually appears in the Hebrew version of the Gospel of Matthew. It's as clear as day. I want to show this to the people, what it looks like in the Hebrew Matthew. This is a page from Matthew chapter 1, verses 18 to 25. And this is a scene in the Gospel of Matthew, Michael, where the angel appears to Joseph and tells him what name to give the unborn child. Now, what it says in the Hebrew, it says here, "V'teled ben v'tikra shemo Yeshua, ki hu yoshia et ami me'avonotam." And I'll share this with some audiences, and I'll say, do you see how that clearly means that this is the original Hebrew version of Matthew, not translation from Greek. And if they nod yes, that means they're no longer paying attention. Or they know Hebrew. I've actually had people in the audience who are fluent Hebrew speakers who say, well, it's as clear as day. There's no question. You can't argue with it. It's definitive that's an original Hebrew text. So in the Greek it says, she will bring forth a son, you shall call his name Jesus, which as I said in Greek is Jesus. For he will save his people from their sins. Now, you read that in Greek and you're left wondering, what on earth does the name Jesus, Jesus, have to do with the statement he'll save his people?
We got a causal conjunction there.
There's the word for, because there's no connection whatsoever. The interesting thing is when you look at this in Aramaic, actually let me show you the Hebrew. In the Hebrew it says, she will bring forth the son, give birth to a son, you shall call his name Yehoshua, for he will save my people from their iniquities. Hebrew is this concise language. We have 3 words in English, he will save. That's the one word in Hebrew, Yoshia. Yoshia means he will save. It has the prefix yah, which means he. We have different 4 prefixes in Hebrew. Oshia is I will save. Noshia, we will save. Toshia, you will save. Yoshia, he will save. That'll be important in a future teaching. Yoshia, he will save. Now you look in the Aramaic, interestingly enough, and it's a Semitic language. You would expect something very similar. The root is Yasha, Yud Shin Ayin. And she will bring forth the son, you shall call his name Yeshua, for he will keep alive his people from their sins, is what it says in the Peshitta Aramaic. Nacheyu is the Aramaic. Yeshua, Yoshia in Hebrew, Yeshua, the name, Yoshia, he will save. Yeshua, Yoshia, it makes sense?
Yeshua because Yoshia.
Yeah.
Yeshua because Yoshia.
And here it's Yeshua because Nacheyu. Yeshua because Nacheyu. It doesn't work in Aramaic.
Doesn't make sense in Aramaic.
Doesn't make sense clearly.
Nor in Greek, nor in English.
Right, and it only really works in Hebrew from the surviving text that we have. Now, this name Yeshua, the interesting thing, Lee, is that it's the name Joshua, Yehoshua, the disciple of Moses. Moses' disciple was originally called Hosea, which means he saves. And Moses wasn't satisfied with his disciple's name, and he changed it to Yehoshua, which means Yehovah saves. That same word, it's Yehovah, Yoshia. That word Yoshia, the same word that appears in Hebrew Matthew, it says he'll be called Yeshua because Yoshia my people from their iniquities, he will save my people. His name itself means Yehovah Yoshia, Yehovah he will save, or Yehovah saves, which is pretty cool. Yeah. Now, there's this really cool passage in, and let me back up, Michael. So if you look at that, I want to show the people this again. This is the same section from Hebrew Matthew 1:18 to 25, where it has the name Yoshia there, but it also has the name Yehovah on that page. Now, you won't see the letters YHVH, and that's because it was copied by a rabbinical scribe. And the rabbinical tradition is outside of a Jewish prayer book or a Tanakh. You can't write the name YHVH, you have to replace it with the word Hashem. And Hashem is often abbreviated as a hey with a little line over it. And what they're seeing right now on the screen is the hey with the little line over it. Now, the really cool thing, Michael, is when I was in China for a year, I went to visit the Jews of Kaifeng. There's an ancient Jewish community in Kaifeng, China. They've been there for over 1,000 years. And they showed me the 10 commandments that they have in both Hebrew and Chinese. And I couldn't really read much of the Chinese, but I immediately could read the Hebrew. And in the Hebrew, the 10 commandments open up, Anochi Yehovah, I am Yehovah. And in their Hebrew, even in China, the Jews write Ani, Hey. Anochi, Hey, I am Hey. Hey meaning Hashem, that is Yehovah. So every Jew knows, even in China, whenever you see the Hey with the line over it, whenever you see Hashem, it represents an original Yud-Hey-Vav-Hey Yehovah.
Right.
And just you don't write it outside of a Tanakh. Even if you're quoting the Tanakh, the 10 Commandments are from the Tanakh, but it's not a Torah scroll or a prayer book, so you write Hey to represent Yehovah. So when you see in Hebrew Matthew Hashem, you know that represents Yehovah. So the really cool thing here in Hebrew Matthew, or let's go to the Greek Matthew 28:9. Now I got to give credit to my friend Keith Johnson, who has discovered this, and he has a series called the Red Letter series, where he's actually going through the Hebrew Matthew, looking at all the words of Yeshua in the original Hebrew of Hebrew Matthew. It's pretty cool. And he found this, Matthew 28:9, it says in the Greek, and as they went to tell his disciples, behold, Jesus met them, Yeshua met them, saying, all hail. Perfectly good Greek and Roman greeting, all hail.
Hail Caesar.
Hail Caesar, right? Chairata in the Greek, which is blessings upon you, hail. So what Keith discovered is that these are, first of all, the first words Yeshua spoke, as you believe and Keith believes, after the resurrection. According also to the Greek Matthew and the Hebrew Matthew, these are the first words Yeshua spoke after the resurrection, but in the Hebrew it doesn't say all hail. In the Hebrew, the first two words he said, as they can see here on the screen, are Hashem Yoshia, which, and again, remember, whenever you see Hashem in the Hebrew, the rabbinical scribes took out the YHVH, Yehovah, and put in Hashem by tradition, but originally it would have said Yehovah Yoshia. So,
which is the meaning of his name.
It's first of all the meaning of his name, which means Yehovah, he will save you. Yehovah will save. Yehovah saves. And the meaning of the name Yeshua. Those were the first words, according to Hebrew Matthew, he spoke after the resurrection. And look, I know there's a lot of people will say, no, Matthew was written in Greek and that Hebrew is a translation from Greek. Really? You're telling me a Jewish scribe in the Middle Ages took out all hail and put in Yehovah Yoshia in the words of Yeshua? That makes no sense whatsoever. What they were trying to show when they were arguing with the Catholics is, this Jesus was not a fulfillment of the Jewish prophecies, and, we shouldn't have, they weren't trying to make him look more Hebraic. They were trying to show how he contradicted himself and how he didn't fulfill the prophecies in the Tanakh. And when he said good things, those were things he took from the rabbis. He wouldn't have, that's actually the arguments they bring. Yeah. Like, for example, they bring the argument, well, he upheld the Sabbath. Why don't you Catholics keep the Sabbath? That's the, the type of argument.
Right, and that was a great argument. I mean, this is what he said. Why are not you doing it? You're not doing it. Why are you getting on us?
Right. Now, they would have never put these words in his mouth, because imagine if you're a rabbi in a debate with a Catholic priest, and you say, well, the first words he spoke after what you believe to be the resurrection were Yehovah Yoshia. Immediately burn the guy at the stake. They'd say, that's not what it says in our Greek. You you liars, you falsified the New Testament. Mm-hmm. Now here's this is amazing, Michael. Did you know that the Talmud actually quotes the New Testament? There's one verse from the New Testament that's quoted. It's in the Talmud, the Tractate of Sabbath, and it turns out it's Matthew 5:17, where Yeshua says, I've not come to do away with one jot or one tittle. It quotes it actually, and it says there in their version, I've come not to add to the Torah or to take away from the Torah. It's a paraphrase, you could say.
Deuteronomy.
It's Deuteronomy 4:2 and 12:32. Yeah. But think about that. It's the only verse in the New Testament they paraphrase. But then they have a discussion after that in the Talmud, the Tractate of Sabbath. And then look, the Talmud has a lot of very technical discussions. And this discussion in the Talmud is talking about according to the rabbinical laws of Shabbat, of how to keep Shabbat, there are 39 things you're not allowed to do. Turns out work isn't one of them, but there's 39 specific actions you're not allowed to do. One of them is you're not allowed to start a fire, according to the Talmud, and the other is you're not allowed to extinguish a fire. So if there's a fire burning, unless it's to save a life, you can't put the fire out. So they start talking in the Talmud about what happens if a Torah scroll falls into a fire. Well, there we've got to grab the Torah scroll from the fire and violate Shabbat to put out the fire. Why? Because the Torah scroll has the name of Yehovah in it, has the divine name in it. And then one rabbi comes along and he says, what about if one of the books of the heretics falls into a fire? And remember, whenever they talked about heretics, minim, that specific word for heretics, minim, there's another word for heretics referring to other people, Epicurus, but minim referred to Jewish believers in Yeshua. He says, what if one of the books of the minim, of the Jewish followers of Yeshua, falls into the fire? And interestingly, they refer to it as evangelion, as the Greek, they use the Greek word for gospel there in the Aramaic Talmud. They said, what if the evangelion falls into the fire? Do we have to grab it from the fire on Shabbat? And one of the rabbis says, of course we do. It has the divine name in it.
Wow.
Whoa. So the rabbis are talking in the 3rd and 4th century AD, after Constantine.
That the Gospels have the name written in it.
They're saying it does have the name written in it, and therefore you do have to grab it from the fire. And this is actually, some of these discussions are taking place after Constantine. And because they were talking about not Christians, they could care less what the Christians were doing. They didn't even really know what the Christians were doing. They were talking about minim, who were people within their community who they called heretics. The heretics didn't call themselves heretics. They called themselves Nazarenes, in all seriousness.
That's right.
These Nazarene Jews believed in Yeshua, kept the Shabbat, practiced circumcision, and had Gospels of Matthew in Hebrew. Jerome mentions this in his writings. He talks about he saw a copy of the Gospel of Matthew in Hebrew among the Nazarenes. who were distinct at that point after Constantine from the Christians. And so the rabbis are talking about these Nazarenes have copies of the Evangelion, of the gospel, with the name YHVH in it, and therefore you've got to grab it from the fire so it doesn't burn. Of course, other rabbis came along and said, let it burn even with the name. But the point is, they knew that the name was in there. And this is the amazing thing about the Hebrew Matthew preserved by Shem Tov. 1,000 years later, it still has some form of the name Yehovah in it. And that was the first word, according to the Hebrew Matthew, that Yeshua spoke after the resurrection in Matthew 28. Yehovah Yoshia, Yehovah, he will save you. It's amazing stuff, Michael. Where do we get Yahweh from? So Yahweh, and really from a New Testament perspective, really this comes down to when Yeshua says that I declared the name of the Father to his disciples. Did he declare to them Yahweh, or did he declare to them Yehovah, or maybe something else, right? Maybe it was, I've said in the past, maybe if we don't know what the vowels are, it could be anything. It could be Yuhu, Vuhu, right? It could be, it could be anything. Now we have over 1,000 Hebrew manuscripts that verify that it's Yehovah. But why is it that all these people think it's Yahweh?
Okay, let me stop you right there, just for a minute.
Yeah.
Because 20 years ago, I did several videos in the land of Israel, and in which I was speaking the name as Yahweh. I was doing that.
Yeah.
And the information that you're about to share with us, I didn't want to listen to. I didn't want to hear what you had to say, and I had to admit it to myself that I didn't want to listen because I already staked my flag on the name of Yahweh. I'd already done videos that have gone out by the hundreds of thousands all around the world, and I had a stake in that. But yet, as this information, as you started bringing this out, it finally came to a point that I can't ignore this. I can't ignore this. And even though I've in 1,000,006 videos I have, and I'm pronouncing the name Yahweh, I finally had to change because the information was there and the revelation also came. We won't go into that, but I'm saying that I had a vested interest in my personal opinion.
Well, and it's not just invested in DVDs. You're emotionally invested in this for years. I think that's it's really a powerful thing, being emotionally invested in things. And what what you did was the best you knew how to do at the time. And I believe that Yehovah honors that. Now we can do better, though. And what I love about you, Michael, is you heard this information and you said, you know what, I can do better. And you made the shift, and you're now saying Yehovah. I want to explain to people where Yahweh comes from.
Okay, please do.
Because for 200 years, the world has been deceived. And not really the Jewish world. The Jewish world doesn't know anything about this. The academic, scholarly world, which then spilled over into the Christian world, has been deceived by this information. I think it's deception. And when I dug into where it came from, I was shocked. Because where it came from is Gesenius. Gesenius is the great grammarian of Hebrew grammar. To this day, the primary lexicons of biblical Hebrew, Brown Diver Briggs and Halot, Hebrew and Aramaic lexicon of the Old Testament, are based on the work of Gesenius in the 1800s. And the primary grammar at Hebrew University, I would sit with these in these classes, and these the professor would assign an assignment to go check in the Hebrew grammar. And the Hebrew grammar, the grammar of biblical Hebrew, isn't in Hebrew. It's in English or German, written by Gesenius. So we had students I was sitting with who were native Hebrew speakers who would come to me and say, can you help us? Our English isn't good enough. Help. I'm like, yeah, I could read this. It's English. It's my native language. And so Gesenius' Hebrew grammar is really the foundation of modern Hebrew, of biblical studies in Hebrew.
And even today at Hebrew University.
At Hebrew University, and rightfully so. He did groundbreaking work. What he really did is he collected things that were done by other people over centuries, and he put them, as Germans are quite good at doing, and especially in the past, is doing things in a systematic way. And so he was very systematic. He is wonderful. I consult Gesenius almost every day, Michael. I'm not saying it's a bad grammar. I'm just saying he didn't get everything right. And if you look at the earlier versions of his dictionary in particular, you get a glimpse into his thought pattern of where he was the one who championed Yahweh and convinced the scholarly world it should be Yahweh, because it was a debate in the Christian world up until then. Meaning Yahweh doesn't appear until 1599. That's the first time it appears in the writings of a man named Gilbert Genebard. And then it's debated for a couple hundred years by the Christians, is it Yehovah, which the Jews seem to think it is, or is it Yahweh? And then Gesenius ends the discussion as Yahweh. And he brings two pieces of evidence, which shocked me because I didn't know this until relatively recently. And he says this in the 1833 edition of his dictionary, which was translated in 1857 into English. And in the dictionary, this part I actually did know, the first part. So the first part is that the main source for Yahweh is a Christian church father named Theodoret of Cyrus, who lived at the end of the 4th, beginning of the 5th century AD. And what Theodoret of Cyrus says is he's talking about the name, and he makes a statement that is quoted in certainly every scholarly work on this topic as evidence for Yahweh. And what Theodoret says in his Questions on Exodus, chapter 7, question number 15, he says, the Samaritans call it Yahweh, while the Jews call it Ayah, which is really interesting because at first you think he's talking about the Tetragrammaton, YHVH, right? And that's what's understood certainly when it comes to the Samaritans. But he says the Jews call God's name Ayah. Well, what's Ayah? So years ago I suggested that Ayah, which supposedly the Jews refer to God as, was a corruption of the Yah that you have in Hallelujah. And that's definitely a possibility. Meaning he's not even talking about the Tetragrammaton when it comes to the Jews, because by the time of Theodoret of Cyrus, there were very small number of Jews who still spoke the name. It was kept as a secret among the rabbis. And certainly this Gentile wouldn't have heard it. Like, that makes no sense that this Christian from from Cyrus and Theodoret, not Cyprus, by the way, that he would have heard this. It doesn't make sense. So where did they hear this from? And how did he get this information from the Samaritans? Remember, we just heard from Josephus that in 168 BC, the Samaritans didn't speak the name of the God of Israel. In fact, they had they referred to God by no name, anonymous, and then they rededicated their temple to Zeus or Jupiter. So that was 168 BC, and now we're being told sometime around 500 AD by Theodoret of Cyrus, that's 700 years later, that the Samaritans pronounce God's name as Yahweh. So where does he get that? So there's a number of possibilities. One is, well, maybe there was some faction of Samaritans who did speak it. I don't know. There isn't really evidence for that. What some scholars suggest, and by the way, this is Gesenius' basis for Yahweh. This statement by Theodoret, what I just read to you, that is the only solid proof of any kind for Yahweh. Is this statement by Theodoret, who's quoting the Samaritans. By the way, Theodoret didn't know Hebrew. The Samaritans weren't even Israelites, so their form of Hebrew was a corrupt form of Hebrew based on the northern dialect, but it was corrupted over time. They don't have the hey sound, for example. This gentleman, the scholar, Samaritan scholar, he says to me, the name of God means YHWH. I said, well, how do you pronounce it in Samaritan Hebrew? Hayah, he says, is Abba. Hoveh, he says, is Ebi. Yehiyah is Yebi. Right, so you can see some remnant there of Hebrew, but their Hebrew is different than the Hebrew that was preserved by the Jewish people. It comes from a different dialect, and that was corrupted over time. So how on earth does Theodoret know what the Samaritans call the God of Israel? So one possibility is that, he heard them say some other word, and he just didn't really, or he heard maybe third or fourth hand, right? Because I doubt he ever met a Samaritan. So somehow the word gets to him that they refer to God as Yahweh or Yahweh. What they might have actually been referring to is what we saw in Exodus 3:14, and other scholars have suggested this. That in Exodus 3:14, we saw that God is called Ehyeh. He says, I am, and then he says, this is what you'll call me for the rest of the time, is YHWH, which is he was, he is, he will be. But Yahweh actually would be pronounced in certain periods of history of Greek as Iaveh. Well, Iaveh could be a form of Ehyeh. And that's what some scholars have suggested. This is simply a corruption of Ehyeh and has therefore nothing to do with the Tetragrammaton. Because in this period, the Samaritans didn't even speak the name. There's another possibility which I find really scary, and it's possible this is true. So, the Samaritans we heard about from Josephus rededicated their temple to Jupiter. Well, what's Jupiter called in Latin? In Latin, he's not called Jupiter. First of all, there's no J in Latin, right? So in Latin, he's called Jupiter. And I actually spoke to an expert in Latin to confirm this. So today in Latin, they say Jove or Jove for Jupiter. Right. But in early, and that's where you get in English where, where Sherlock Holmes says, oh, by Jove, I think I've got it. He's saying, by Jupiter. What are you saying? You're saying by Jupiter. That's what he was saying. Can you believe that? I don't know what the English were thinking back then in the 1800s. But anyway, there's different forms of Jupiter. And I don't want to get too complicated here, but there are different, what they call cases in Latin. So there's Jupiter, Jovis, Jovi, Jovum, Jove, Jupiter. But basically in the early Latin, it wasn't a V, it was a W. And so it wasn't pronounced Jove, it was pronounced Yahweh in Latin 2,000 years ago. So now we have this word Yahweh. And where do we get Jupiter from Yahweh? Jupiter is Yehopater, Father Yahweh. That is the name of Jupiter. That was the god of the Latins, Yahweh. And I heard that, I'm like, that sounds awfully like Yahweh. And we know that the Samaritans dedicated their temple to Jupiter, Jupiter of the Greeks. So maybe if you went to a Samaritan and said, what's the name of the god in that temple? He would say to you, that's Father Yahweh, Yehopater. So wait a minute. So maybe this is what they heard from the Samaritans. It's just not the name of YHVH, the God of Israel. Now you say, okay, come on. Gesenius isn't going to fall for that. He knew Greek. He knew Latin. He learned Greek and Latin before he learned Hebrew. He was a solid German scholar. Back then, even in your day, I think people learned Latin, right? And in the earlier generations, Europeans and people from the West learned Greek and Latin really well. Mm-hmm. And so he knew about Yahweh being the name of Jupiter. And you think, how could there be any connection between what he said, what Gesenius, this great German scholar of Hebraic studies, said, and Jupiter? Well, he actually admits that there is. Let me read you what he says. And I saw this, and I'm like, there it is. It's the smoking gun. These are the words of Gesenius in his 1857 edition of his dictionary. He says, I suppose this word, referring to Yahweh, and earlier in the paragraph, he says, hey, this comes from the Samaritans, Yahweh, which is Yahweh. I suppose this word to be one of the most remote antiquity, perhaps is the same origin as Jovis, which is Jois, and Jupiter, meaning Jove and Jupiter, and transferred from the Egyptians to the Hebrews. So, what? So in other words, Gesenius is telling us we have two pieces of information here. We have a name for God from the Samaritans, which is Yahweh, which sounds awfully like, which he believes would originally have been Yahweh. And Yahweh sounds awfully like Yahweh of the Latins. And we have, so we have that. In other words, we have this statement by Theodoret connecting it to the Samaritan Yahweh, which he thinks is Yahweh. And we have this Latin god called Yahweh. He says these two things can't be a coincidence. It must be that both the Hebrews and the Latins come from worship some ancient deity who was called Yahweh or Yahweh. And they both then separated into different places. The Latins went to Italy. The Israelites went to Israel. And they both continue to call upon this name with a slightly different pronunciation. The Latins as Yahweh and the Hebrews as Yahweh.
And he's suggesting that it came from the Egyptians?
And it came from the Egyptians, he claims. Now, he wrote this originally in 1833. And that's significant because at that time, they didn't really know what hieroglyphics meant. In other words, they hadn't fully deciphered the hieroglyphics. Mm-hmm. And so you could kind of say anything you wanted about the ancient Egyptians, right?
They did.
And they did, right? Right. I mean, famously, there was, one particular group who said, yes, we have this document in hieroglyphics. Here's our translation of it. Turns out they just made that all up. Once scholars actually deciphered hieroglyphics.
That's embarrassing for Salt Lake City.
Yeah, you said that. In any event, so here you have him saying explicitly, he's tying together Yahweh of the Samaritans in Theodoret and the Yahweh of Jupiter of the Latins, and saying, yeah, they both got that from the Egyptians. So I saw this, I said, wait a minute. So your proof for Yahweh, the great scholar who advocates for Yahweh, is telling us it's the name of a pagan deity. And it's the name of some Egyptian deity that both the Latins and the Hebrews worship. Well, first of all, if it's the name of a pagan deity, then it doesn't mean he was, he is, and he is to come.
Right.
And he claims it doesn't mean that because he bases it on a Hebrew form that is, I won't get into too complicated stuff, but it's the He-Phil form, and the name Yehovah, which comes from YHWH, comes from the Kal form. It's a different form of the verb. And the name Yehovah can mean he was, he is, he is to come. Yahweh can't mean that. It doesn't have that meaning. The actual meaning of Yahweh is unclear as well, if it means anything. And why is it unclear? Because they believed it came from some Egyptian deity, so it isn't even Hebrew. I was actually just at the SBL conference in Society of Biblical Literature, and this woman gave a lecture, and she says, this isn't a Hebrew name. This is an ancient pagan name. Today, in this century, people are still saying the same thing. This was in November 2017. A serious scholar was giving a paper saying this is the name of a pagan deity that transferred from other languages eventually into Hebrew. And if you want to know the name of the meaning of the word, don't look in Hebrew, look at these other pagan languages. So what he was saying back then in 1833, what Gesenius was saying is still being advocated by people today. Now, Michael, when I heard this, some people make fun of me. They say that I'm really liberal because, look, I say if you want to call him Yahweh, call him Yahweh. And I still say that. But at least know what the background of Yahweh is and where it comes from. Now, the God of Israel, I believe, is far more merciful than we are. And so, I don't want people to hear this and say, oh, no, I've been praying to the wrong God. You haven't been praying to the wrong God. You were doing the best you could with what you had. But now you've got better information, and you should be convicted by that. You need to follow the truth when you discover it. I want to read a passage from Psalm 44. I talk about this passage. This was a life-changing passage for me, Michael. It's a verse in Psalm 44. I talk about it in my book, Shattering the Conspiracy of Silence. I have a whole section on that in my book. So it's talking in Psalm 44 about the Israelites being taken into exile. If you read the whole context here, they're taken into exile. They're captives in a foreign land. And then they say in verse 20 in the English, 21 in the Hebrew. Let me read the Hebrew. It says, Im shachachnu shem Eloheinu. If we forgot the name of our God, v'nifros kapenu le'el zar, and we stretched out our hands, our palms, to a foreign God. What does that mean? The way the Israelites would pray, I do this, and some people say, are you a Pentecostal? No, I'm praying like an Israelite. This is how the Israelites would pray. They would stretch up their hands to God, raising their hands. He says, if we forgot the name of our God and we stretched out our palms to a foreign deity, Halo Elohim yachakor zot, will God not investigate this? Ki hu yodea talumot lev, for he knows the mysteries of the heart. That is, I'm in a foreign land, and I grew up being told you're not allowed to say the name of your God. We have this concept in Judaism, tinok shenishba. And it refers to a time in history which actually has come back, unfortunately. It literally means the baby who is taken captive by pirates. It refers to a time in history when Jews would travel the Mediterranean, and there were these Muslim pirates, the Barbary pirates. Right. Thomas Jefferson dealt with them.
Oh, yeah.
But Jews were dealing...
had to go to the shore of Tripoli.
Right, that's the shores of Tripoli. Right. So this was a problem for Jews for over 1,000 years, living in the Mediterranean, that Jewish babies would be captured. And then they would meet their father years later, and the child would have been raised as a Muslim. And so rabbis discussed, they said the tinok shenishba, the baby that was captured by the pirates, Jews are supposed to follow the Torah, we're taught. But this Jew doesn't know any better. He was captured by pirates. And as I'm sharing this, I'm realizing Gesenius in some way was a linguistic pirate. He captured the hearts of billions of people for the last 200 years to tell them, hey guys, it's Yahweh. And if you read my books, you'll find out I also think Yahweh is a pagan deity. It's right there in his book. He's telling you Yahweh is the name of some Egyptian deity that's also worshipped by the Latins. And that's why it's Yahweh, because it fits Yahweh, the Jupiter form. So, we're in a world where we've been lied to and deceived for 200 years, and now we're like that baby who was taken captive by the pirates and meets his father and realizes, in my heart, I feel that I'm a Jew. In my heart, I feel the God of Israel and the truth. And when I hear it, I can repent. Now, I'm not going to be judged for what I did when I didn't know any better. That's the idea of tinok shenishba. But now that I know, and my heart is stirred, I can return to the God of Israel. And this is what it's talking about in Psalm 44. It literally talks about these people who grew up in Babylon and were told, don't speak the name of your God. And instead they're calling out the names of Baal and Marduk and who knows what deities, right? Because they don't know any better. But in their hearts, they're turning their hearts towards the one true God, towards the God of Israel in innocence. And so I don't think God is striking people down because they're calling upon God with the wrong name. But it's still important to try to get it right if we can. right? We've been captivated by this falsehood for 200 years, since 1833 when Gesenius wrote that, and now we have better information. Surely we should act on that better information. And we were talking before about, from your perspective in the New Testament, you've got Yeshua, and I know there's people who have been saved in the name of Jesus. They'll tell you it was on a certain date with a certain time. And you're not saying, Michael, right, to those people, hey, that salvation experience you had, that was false. You're not saying that, right?
No.
That's not the point. That's not the point we're making here. The point we're making here is, okay, you had that experience. God's that merciful that if you mispronounce his name, that he can still find you where you are. Even if you call him by a mispronunciation based on the name Jupiter, he can still respond to your prayer. He's that amazing, that merciful. But now that we know better, we should return to the truth, doing the best we can with this information as knowledge is being increased. Would go around saying what scholars, as you said, for centuries have been saying, which is, well, the Jews didn't know how to pronounce the name. We find it in the manuscripts, but after that it disappeared and nobody knew how to pronounce the name. And what we find is, in fact, this was preserved by the rabbis. Maybe not all the rabbis, but we have rabbis who preserve. I want to read one of these sources, and I can't get to all 10 of them. For that, they'll have to go to my website, nehemiahaswell.com.
Good idea.
I'm going to get this in the segment that we have. I'm going to get as many of these as I can. And so one of them is a rabbi in the 14th century named Menachem Tzioni. And he writes a commentary, and in his commentary in Exodus 3:15, which is the verse where God reveals his name, and he's commenting on the words, Zeh Shmi Le'olam, this is my name forever. And this is what he says. He says there's also a secret here received by tradition in the vowels of this is my name forever. What does that mean? Well, you read it in Hebrew, it's obvious. The word forever is Le'olam. And you can see here, I have a graphic that illustrates this. Le'olam has the same vowels as Yehovah, which are the vowels Shva, Cholam, Kamatz. And this is what it looks like in English. Le'olam, Yehovah. He's telling us the statement, this is my name forever, is itself a hint at the true pronunciation of the name. Now, is that what God meant when he said to Moses, this is my name forever? I don't think so. But the rabbi this rabbi in the 14th century, Menachem Tzioni, he's saying, look, I know the secret. I received it from another rabbi who whispered it to me in my ear or over water or whatever. And the way we remember this is the verse, this is my name forever, which has the vowels of the pronunciation of the name. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Who knows what he means by this? He says, this is my name forever, are the vowels of the great name. I don't know what he means. Well, thankfully he goes on, and he says, its mnemonic is, who in heaven can measure up to you? A mnemonic is an acronym that helps you remember something. And the Hebrew mnemonic, you'd never get this from the English. And by the way, this has never been translated into English. I'm the first one to translate this into English in 2017. And the mnemonic, who in heaven can measure up to you, the word there that's the mnemonic is the word heaven, which normally is the word shamayim, but in this verse the word is shachak. And you say, well, what is that? What's the answer? Well, shachak is an acronym for the vowels Shva, Cholam, Kamatz, which are the vowels of the name Yehovah. And I did a thing here where in this graphic you can see the little two dots underneath the Yud. That's called a Shva in Hebrew. And it's funny because I'll talk to this friend of mine who doesn't know Hebrew, and he's studying these things, and he calls it the Shiwa. But no, we call it the Shva. And then the second vowel there is called a Cholam, and the third is a Kamatz. And if you take the first letter of each of those words, and technically in English it's the first two letters of Shiva, but in Hebrew that's one letter, the Shin, the names of these vowels form the acronym Shachak, which means heaven. So the rabbi has told you it's the vowels of the word Le'olam, it's the vowels that are represented by the word Shachak, and this is the same rabbi. And then he goes on, he shares some other things, and I won't go into all of it, but he ends this teaching, or part of it, he says, thus far, this is the most amazing part, Michael. As I'm reading this, I read this months ago, and I'm looking at this Hebrew text, and I was shaking. I was in tears. Here's a rabbi who wrote this in the 14th century, so we're talking like, 1375, right? That's 700 years ago. Nobody's brought this in the discussion on the name, and I'm reading this source, at least nobody I found has brought. They'll bring the Gnostic sources, everybody, but not the Jews. Here's what the rabbi says. He's told you it's the vowels of Le'olam. he tells you it's the vowel shva cholam kamatz. He says that a third time, which I'm skipping to save time here. And then he says, thus far the words of the man who revealed the secret to me. I got the chills when I read that. He's telling us he stood by a riverside with his ankles up to the water or something like that. I don't know if it was exactly that, but he participated in the chain of transmission. And he tells us that this was received by tradition. And this was revealed to him as a secret by some man. We don't know what man, but he received this as a tradition that the true pronunciation of the name is Yehovah. And the way he was told to remember it is, because if I pronounce a word to you, and you ever probably broken telephone? The way I pronounce it might be different how you pronounce it, and the way she pronounces it, and the way he pronounces it. But if we have these mnemonics and other devices, it helps us preserve the vowels. So if we know that the acronym is Shachak, which is Shva Cholam Kamatz, and it rhymes with the vowels of Lit Olam, which is Yehovah, there's no way you can get it wrong. And he's telling us, I didn't make this up. This was revealed to me in the 14th century. And this is just one rabbi of 16 that I've discovered so far. There might be more, but one of 16 rabbis who says the name is Yehovah, and he makes it really clear what he's talking about. So that's one rabbi. Let me bring you another one. This other one's kind of interesting, and I want to give you the background first. And I'm keeping my eye on the time. I want to get to I'm not going to get to all 10 or 16. I'm going to get to as many as I can. But so the background to the next one, this rabbi is a rabbi who wrote in 1608. His name is Shabtai Sofer. He's considered the greatest grammarian of the 17th century and the 16th century. And it's interesting because the previous rabbi, Menachem Tzioni, was a mystic. This rabbi is a grammarian. Very different mentalities for rabbis. And he's talking about a passage in the Talmud, which I bring in my book, Shattering the Conspiracy of Silence. The passage says that, look, this ban on the name, it's only for now. In the world to come, we'll speak the name. And here's how they phrase it. They say, this world is not like the world to come. And again, the world to come is, according to the rabbis, the kingdom under the reign of the Messiah on earth. This world, the exile, is not like the kingdom of the Messiah. In this world, the name is written YHVH, and it's read as Adonai. That's the tradition, to read it as Adonai. But in the world to come, it will be one, written YHVH and read YHVH. And of course, they're referring to Zechariah 14:9, which I won't sing again. But they're alluding back to that. Your name will be one, you will be one, your name will be one. So this is what he says in 1608. He writes this, he doesn't publish this in a book. He writes this in a letter to another rabbi, and it was never meant to be printed, but it was. So he writes this as a letter, and we have the letter, and we have the response to the letter, which I'll get to in a few minutes. He says, is it not known, the saying of the sages? And he quotes that passage. In this world it's written YHVH and read Adonai. In the world to come it will be written YHVH and read YHVH. And then he says, and behold, when it is read as YHVH in the world to come, then its vowels will be Shachak. And remember, Shachak is an acronym for Shva, Cholam, Kamatz, the vowels that form in Hebrew Yehovah. It's beautiful. He's not, I mean, it's amazing. And it's interesting. So he's a grammarian, and as a grammarian, he's asking the question, why do we have vowels in a word that we don't read? Because by Jewish tradition, we don't read the word Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. When we see that word, we read it as Adonai. Well, are those the vowels of Adonai? It's self-evident that they're not. So what are the vowels doing there? He explains, in the world to come, we'll speak that name, and they'll pick up a Bible, and they'll see the vowels of the name itself, which are Shachak, Shva, Cholam, Kamatz. Unequivocal that this rabbi is saying the name is Yehovah, not Yahweh, not Yahuwah, though you don't find that in Jewish sources, not at least that I found, but that it's Yehovah, Shva, Cholam, Kamatz. Now, that rabbi is writing in 1608, and he wrote to a rabbi in Poland named Maharam of Lublin, also known as Mayor of Lublin. And to be honest with you, he's probably the most famous, or the second most famous at least, of all these rabbis that I quote, that I found. He's a very famous rabbi, the Maharam of Lublin, and he wrote a response to Shabtai Sofer. And I want to read this. It's amazing. So he writes to Shabtai Sofer, and they're talking about a certain grammatical point that I don't have time to get into. But while they're talking about that grammatical point that they're arguing back and forth about, they both bring up the vowels of the name. So he says, know, my beloved, how extremely difficult it is to put things like this in writing, and even more so a letter sent about from place to place, concerning the vowels of the tetragrammaton, which are shvach olam kamatz. Like
he openly says it.
He openly says it. Openly. He's not even arguing about that point. He's saying, look, this is really hard to write this. I'm sending this in a letter that's being carried by donkey or something. I don't know who's going to read this letter. You asked me, so I've got to respond to show I'm not, that I know what I'm talking about. And you asked me, I got to respond.
Who's the donkey that's delivering it now in 2017?
Yeah, I'm the ass that speaks out. I wrote a famous paper called "The Ass Speaks Out" about referring to Balaam's ass. Guys, you go read that on my website, nehemiahaswell.com. So he says straight out, like that's his opening. I mean, not opening, but he's saying that, like that's just the facts we can all agree on concerning the vowels shvach olam kamatz, which are Yehovah, shvach olam kamatz. And then he says, I found in the words of my grandfather, our teacher, Rabbi Asher Lemel, head of the Beit Din of Krakow, he wrote a holy book called Emek HaBracha, but because of its immense holiness, it was never printed, that it not be used by those who are not worthy. And then he quotes the book of his grandfather. I'm not going to go into it, but I'll read it. Why not? So this is what it says in chapter 34. He's quoting the book of his grandfather verbatim. And it says, concerning the tetragrammaton, its vowels received from Sinai are shvach olam kamatz. There's no room for Yahweh here. It's Yehovah, according to these rabbis. And you could say, who cares what rabbis say? And hopefully in the next episode, if you'll have me back, we'll talk about what it says in the Bible itself in the manuscripts,
we'll have to do that because these are things that have not been printed, haven't been
so many of them have
in
never
the West
been seen,
at all.
Many of them have never been seen except by me and this one other person. All right. So here are what rabbis are saying the name is as it was transmitted to them and preserved by them. And he's quoting his grandfather's other sources. I can't bring them all, but I think it's interesting. So he's quoting a book by his grandfather, and he says, look, this book was too holy to print. The book of my grandfather. I have it hand copied because I received it from my grandfather. Mm-hmm. So I contacted the National Library of Israel, and I said, there's this reference to this book, Emek Bracha, written by Asher Lemel. Do you have it? And they said, well, we have 90,000 Hebrew manuscripts, and we don't have that one. As far as we know, it doesn't exist. And I asked them after I had exhausted all the other databases and resources. And so as far as I know, this book was so holy it was never printed. And because it was never printed, we only have it surviving in a quotation by the author's grandson, Maharam of Lublin, which is amazing. So there's other sources. I'm going to skip some of these. Okay, so I love how Maharam of Lublin, this guy, mayor of Lublin, in 1600, ends a letter to Shabtai Sofer. He says, I have one request, that you hide this letter in a pure and holy place and not allow it to be passed around here and there. So he wrote this letter as a response to another rabbi stating matter-of-factly the information. He knew as a secret that the name was Yehovah, and that his grandfather knew as a secret that it was Yehovah. And he said, look, it's hard to write this. Who knows who's going to read it? Make sure that you hide this letter after you've read it. And you know what? When he died, his disciples found a copy of the letter and they printed it. And because of that, we're able to sit here and share this with the entire world. We were never meant to know what's in this letter. This was meant to be a secret. Now, Michael, I was doing this research, and you have to understand, I was waking up and I was going till, it'd be like 9 p.m. at night, and I was thinking, okay, I found this source, and I got to find the other source, 5 more minutes, and it'd be 3 in the morning, and then 5 in the morning, and finally I'd have to go to sleep and sleep for a few hours, and then wake up, and I've shared this with a friend who's a Methodist, and he said, Nehemiah, do you know what we call that in my tradition? I said, no, what? He said, Nehemiah, you're arrested by the Spirit. I said, okay, I wouldn't call it that necessarily, but it's true. I couldn't put this down. I was so engrossed in this. I was finding these sources. There was one source I couldn't find online or in any of my databases, but I found out there was a library or a bookstore, a used bookstore in Jerusalem that had a copy of a certain book I needed. So I called up a friend in Israel and I said, I'm begging you, stop everything you're doing, go to that bookstore, buy the book and overnight it to me. It took 3 days to overnight it from Israel. I was shaking for 3 days and couldn't sleep while I was waiting. And when I got it, it didn't disappoint. It was amazing, these things. So while I was doing this, Michael, I had to clear my head. My head was spinning. Now, one of the things I've shared, and I think I've shared this with you, I definitely shared it publicly, is that on my mother's side, I'm descended from this famous rabbi named Zalmala of Volozhin, and he, according to my uncle and cousin, was a descendant of King David. And as I was doing this research, looking at these sources, I decided, you know what? I've been sharing that for years, and I'd like to dig down to the sources and find out, is it even true? You know, and I was pretty certain I was descended from Zalmala of Volozhin, but I didn't know how. I knew my great-grandfather, Nehemiah Robinson, after whom I'm named, was his descendant. But how? What are their names? How does it tie in? So I start doing this genealogy research, and I started on Ancestry.com. I mean, it's really simple. Paid the money. I end up on all these different websites. I end up finding my I think third great-grandfather or something, birth certificate written in Hebrew from Lithuania from 1846. And that traces me back eventually to this woman who's the daughter of Rabbi Zalmala of Volozhin. And my ancestor was a rabbi who married the daughter of this other rabbi, right? Now, nobody knew the name of this woman. And this is my claim to descending from the famous rabbi. From her, nobody ever heard of her, right? You know, a small group of people in planet Earth. This is the creator of the universe. We should all know his name. It should be proclaimed from every rooftop. My ancestors were part of the conspiracy to hide our father's name. And Michael, I have to confess and repent here for the sin of the collective sin of the generations. You know, we have the story in Joshua where they stole they took from the gold, and that they weren't supposed to take from Jericho, and it became a sin, the collective sin of the people. And we have this verse in Jeremiah 23:27. It says, "They plan to make my people forget my name." And that's part of my heritage. And I need to go back to what it says in the Bible and not continue the tradition of hiding the name. Now, I have a whole bunch of other sources. I want to end with a rabbi from 1896. He was a rabbi named Jacob Backrack. And in 1896, he writes a whole bunch of things. I'll read this really quick. He says, if the vowels of the tetragrammaton were indeed the vowels of Adonai, precision would have required putting a chat of patach under the yud for the aleph of Adonai. Those who don't know what that means, go and research that. Anybody who you tell in scholarship that these are the vowels of the name Yehovah, they'll say, well, no, that's the vowels of Adonai, and here's why. Here's a rabbi in 1896 who says that's utter nonsense, that's completely a misunderstanding of the vowels. Let me read you the end of what he says after saying the vowels are shvach olam kamatz. He says, according to the rulings that have come down to us, this is a rabbi, there is no prohibition from the Torah to speak the name the way it is written. However, the custom not to pronounce the name the way it is written is very old. Thus, it is not right to pronounce the name. In other words, he's saying, look, it's not a Torah prohibition, but we're not allowed to do it because we have a custom not to do it. But he's saying, and he ends, there's no prohibition from the Torah. And then he says, there was a time, meaning in history, there was a time, it's a rabbi in 1896 saying this, Michael. There was a time and there shall again be a time when all the peoples, all of them, will call on the name of Yehovah. And Yehovah will be one and his name will be one. That's Zechariah 14:9 again. For this tradition of reading what is not written, Adonai, which that is Lord, will be completely abolished. And then we will all read it the way it is written as Yehovah. So we have this chorus of rabbis. We have what we call in Hebrew a minyan of rabbis, a quorum of 10, even 16 rabbis proclaiming that the name is Yehovah. And I haven't found any of these early Jewish sources or medieval Jewish sources even that say the name is Yahweh, the name is Yahuwah. What I found is these rabbis repeatedly saying the name is Yehovah, and you can't let people know this. And even my own ancestors were part of that conspiracy of silence. Michael, we read those prophecies. The world needs to know what that name is. It needs to be proclaimed to all the nations. And may the prayer of this rabbi be fulfilled. And I had this prayer. It was this burning desire. Father, I want to know what your name is, and not based on some man's theory, but the way it was preserved by the scribes. But the scribes didn't preserve it a way I could pronounce it. So I'm sitting there minding my own business, and I'm looking through, and you have to understand, on every page of the Bible, I'm looking at 4 sets of symbols that I have to make sure are copied exactly, precisely. We have consonants, vowels, accents, and what's called Masoretic notes. And it's my job to make sure those 4 sets of symbols in the Aleppo Codex are transferred to this printed Bible. And like I said, it'd been done before. And really the type of thing I was finding is, there's a little a Masoretic note and it's in the wrong position, so let's correct that and move it. I mean, it was relatively trivial things that I was able to find because it was just so precisely done. And as I was doing this, I would come across the name YHWH, saw it all the time, almost on every page, and, noticed day after day that one of the vowels was missing, making it unpronounceable. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting there, and I find a place where the missing vowel is not missing. And it was Ezekiel 3:12, and it says, Baruch kavod Yehovah mimakomo. Blessed is the glory of Yehovah from his place. And I looked at that word YHWH, which was unpronounceable, and all of a sudden it had a full set of vowels, which were Yehovah. And just at that moment, I get a phone call, and the voice on the other end of the phone says, a plane just flew in the World Trade Center. And I thought, that's some kind of fluke. I didn't know. I didn't have internet access. I didn't, have a smartphone. They didn't exist yet. All I knew is this person on the other end of the phone said a plane. I figured it was like a Cessna or something, like crop duster, some small thing. I don't know. I put down the phone. I'm not even thinking about that. Maybe that was some kind of accident. What I'm thinking about is this a fluke? I just found the name with full vowels in the manuscript, in the Aleppo Codex, the most accurate manuscript. So I said, okay, I'm putting aside my work. My job is to check 4 sets of symbols. I'm going to check one word, and I'm going to just skim the pages, looking just for that one word to find a second witness. And I'm skimming the pages, page after page, keep coming across YHWH, the name of the Father, and the vowels missing again, unpronounceable. And I thought, well, it was at one time. I need a second witness. I'm flipping, and then all of a sudden, after about 15 minutes, I come across it. It's Ezekiel 28:22.
Again in Ezekiel.
Again in Ezekiel. This one's actually really significant. It's a prophecy, and I was reading Ezekiel. That's why I found it there. Mm-hmm. It's a prophecy about Sidon. And it says, and you shall prophesy concerning it, and you shall say, thus says Lord Yehovah. And Yehovah there had the full vowels, Yehovah. And what's interesting there is by tradition, when the word YHWH appears next to Adonai, which is Lord, you're to read it as Elohim, which is God. And so not only was this a full set of vowels showing you the name as Yehovah, by tradition, those are not the vowels that should have been in this word, yet those are the vowels the scribe put in there. And then I get a second phone call, and the person told me, a second plane just flew into the World Trade Center. And I realized, that wasn't an accident. At that time, I had no idea who was behind it, but I knew that was on purpose. And this couldn't be just an accident either. This was something this isn't a fluke. That's for sure. I knew. Now, I didn't realize the full significance. It took me time to process both things, both what happened on 9/11, probably like it did for many people, and also what happened here, what I had found, and what I didn't fully realize the significance until the 10th anniversary of 9/11. I was speaking to a friend and telling, reminiscing about what had happened, and he said, "You realize the significance of that timing?" And I'll be honest, there's this expression, people who miss the forest for the trees. I'm not looking at the trees. I'm looking at the leaves under a microscope at the cells of the leaves, and I miss even the tree. I'm a detail-oriented person. It's just in my nature. So I had missed this. He said, "Do you realize at that exact moment when those terrorists flew their planes into the towers and they shouted out the name of their God?" Because that's what they do.
Allahu Akbar.
That's what they do.
Allah is greater.
They proclaim the name of their God because their God is death, but they proclaim the name of their God because they're doing this in the name of their God, their death. And at that moment, the creator of the universe halfway across the world wanted his name to be known and allowed me to find this. And I'm the one who found it and didn't realize the full significance of that. And you have to understand, I really struggled with even sharing this because the tradition I come from, the Jewish tradition, really frowns on anything too spiritual. No, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. Mm-hmm. In fact, I was sharing this at a conference a few years ago, and this old Jewish man comes up to me and says, "Why do you have to share the thing about the towers and the planes? Just show us what's in the manuscript." And that's the tradition I came from.
Uh-huh.
But looking back now, this, to me, I'm convinced more than ever that this is the hand of God. And I'm going to share something which I just told you the other day, and I just discovered myself. And I didn't know this on 9/11. I didn't know it on the 10th anniversary of 9/11. I found this out very recently. So one of the things I didn't know is how many times in the Aleppo Codex does the name appear with the full vowels? So the Aleppo Codex is the Bible. There are pages that are missing. So from the surviving pages, we have the name appearing about 4,000 times. And the question I had for years is how many times does the name appear with the full vowels in the Aleppo Codex? But the Aleppo Codex is about 600 pages that have survived. And I had looked through about 100 of them, and I found a third place. And, my assumption was that if you spent an hour, you would find another place and another hour, another place. If you knew what you were looking for, that maybe every 30, 40 pages you'll find one. That was my assumption, right? Because I had found it within 15 minutes twice. So I'm sure if you did that and you had the eye for it, you'd find it twice about every 15 minutes, half hour. Well, so recently I was working together with this gentleman who I call T-Bone. And I had trained him through this interaction I had with how to find the name with the full vowels in manuscripts. Now, he started out not reading Hebrew at all. And he could identify the 4 letters of the Father's name. Right. And he had this passion, this desire to try to find the Father's name with full vowels in more places. So I said, okay, you've done a few manuscripts. We've worked together on that. Would you like to do the Aleppo Codex? It's about, I think it's 594 pages of survived, something like that. It's nearly 600 pages. And I figured I'm going to hear from him in 2 or 3 years. 3 days later, he contacts me. He said, okay, I went through the whole thing. The whole thing? And he sent me a list of places where he found it with the full vowels. I checked every single one. And some of them he was wrong. And some of them I'm like, oh no, that's mold. Or that's, that's not a vowel. That's an accent mark called Ravia Mugrash. There's all kinds of things, little dots and dashes. You have to know what you're looking at. But at the end, it turned out there were 6 clear, definitive places that had the full vowels in the Aleppo Codex. In the entire thing. Out of 4,000 places, there's only 6 with the full vowels. And I found 2 of those on 9/11. And guess what? There's only 2 in the book of Ezekiel. If I had been reading in the book of Jeremiah that day, I wouldn't have even found 1, let alone 2. If I'd been reading in the book of Isaiah, I would have found 1, but not 2. It was only in Ezekiel that I could have found those 2 in that span of time in those sections that I happened to be reading. And I didn't realize this. I thought, okay, well, this is clearly the hand of God. After years, I came to accept that I found it at this timing. But there was a dimension I didn't even know about until recently. That 6 times. And I want to share the other times with the people. I'm going to show it here on the screen. So,
okay. Now,
can we do that?
Yeah, we can do that.
The 6 most important manuscripts of the Bible, indisputably, when they print a Bible, they base it in the Aleppo Codex, but the Aleppo Codex has missing pages. So they compare it with 5 other Bibles. The Leningrad Codex, something called the British Library, or 4445, Cairo Codex of the Prophets, Damascus Crown, and Sassoon 1053. Those are the 6 key manuscripts of the Bible with vowels. They're all from the 9th and 10th century. The earliest one is the Cairo Codex of the Prophets from 895. The latest one is the Leningrad Codex, which is actually from 1008. It's the latest one of the group. And all 6 of them have the full vowels. Here it is in the Leningrad Codex, Leviticus 25:17. And I love the verse once again. Ki ani Yehovah Elohechem, for I am Yehovah your God, and you can't miss it. It has the full vowels. It says Yehovah. That's a fact. It's not an opinion. It's not a theory. It's not something someone had in a vision, and you know what? Maybe people have had visions. I've had people, write to me and say, well, but God personally told me his name is Yahuwashi. I can't argue with what God personally told you. Here it is in the manuscripts, the oracles of God.